So if you're into cars and you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably had the misfortune of spotting the 2023 BMW M2, which has just entered a new generation. Now, BMW is a company that has made some very questionable styling decisions in the past few years, pretty much ruining the M3 and M4 with massive buck teeth-like grills on the front of them that are still yet to grow on me to this day. Now, the new M2 didn't follow in those cars' paths. However, they redesigned it in a pretty different way that is causing a lot of controversy. If you have seen anything about the car recently, most of it is negative, with many people saying that it looks absolutely horrible, which I also do agree with. So today I'm going to be making a video exploring the reasons why the car is getting so much hate and why it's probably not going to be as successful as the previous generation M2. First and foremost, with the new M2, the styling is quite an issue. The previous BMW M2 was one of the best looking cars on the road and wasn't really disputed as such. However, the new one has taken a very questionable new path, with a lot of the lines being kind of taken out of the car, and it's not as curvy anymore. It's been very boxed off, and a lot of the other design cues, such as the headlights, the taillights, and the front end, all kind of look a little bit strange. Now, I do want to first throw out there that the interior has maintained very high quality. This is something that BMW has always done very well with. The seats are absolutely phenomenal. The entire gauge cluster and dashboard is different. I don't know how I feel about the screen that goes across the entirety of the dashboard, but all in all, I'll give that a pass. I think the interior is completely fine. However, as we go to the exterior, this is where some of the problems are starting to arise. First off, the front end. Thankfully, they left the grille at a normal size and decided to not make it take up the entire front bumper. However, what they did do is make two very odd-looking square inserts below the headlights on either side of the front end that are pretty much being talked about left and right. That is because they look quite odd, they protrude very far out, and I think what they did on the M240i was a little bit better, which if you haven't seen that car, it's pretty similar but with a triangular shape as opposed to just the block rectangle that they have going on with the new M2. Now, as we move to kind of the side profile of the car, this is where things really get kind of screwed up. Even though the roofline looks pretty similar to the previous generation M2, all of the curves and nice smooth lines that you used to see on the car have been pretty much straightened out to just sharp edges and lines everywhere that are all rectangular. Now, something to note on the side that I think looks very weird is the side skirt. Normally, the side skirt acts as a separated body panel from the rest of the car, and you can see it just runs along the bottom of the car. However, now it is connected to the rear quarter panel that runs over the rear wheel, and basically, because of that, when you see the sharp line of where the panels are connecting, that panel gap, it looks very strange how it just comes up there and then runs with the rest of the car. But yes, the main takeaway from the side of the car is that everything has been really straightened out and made very blocky and squared off, which doesn't really match what BMW has done in the past, especially with the previous generation of the M2 being a very sleek and smooth car. I think this definitely contributes to it looking significantly worse, with many people saying it looks like the Grand Theft Auto version of itself. As we get to the back end, things only get worse, and I think this is the worst angle of the car. The headlights look the taillights look absolutely abysmal. There's some very strange design going on there. I'm not sure who thought of it, and pretty much everything else about the back end is the same, where it's all very oddly just squared off and just doesn't really fit what we know as BMW. And I understand that this might grow on us over the years, but for the time being, it is definitely a very strange choice that I do not think has been well received. So the second issue with the brand new BMW M2 is probably the one that you've been hearing the most about, and it's certainly the one that I have seen the most scattered across the internet, and that is that the BMW M2 has come off of its diet. It's gained roughly 400 pounds, which might not sound like a lot if you're thinking that cars weigh, oh, well, they're thousands of pounds, so it's not that big of a deal. However, that is quite a lot when we look at the physics of it. So acceleration is not actually determined by horsepower, but rather power to weight ratio, and we know this from the physics world as Newton's second law, which says that force is equal to mass times acceleration. If we reorient that equation using algebra to solve for acceleration, we get that acceleration is equal to force divided by mass, also known as a power to weight ratio essentially. Now, more specifically, the power part, the force part, is actually going to be torque, which is rotational force, but the torque output has also done the same thing as power for this generation. The power to weight ratio of the new M2 is roughly 10% higher than the power to weight ratio of the previous M2, so it should accelerate slightly faster in a straight line when we're talking about the force of the engine trying to overcome the mass of the vehicle. However, where the problem with the new weight that's been added to the car comes into play is not when you're accelerating in a straight line, but for everything else. First and foremost, let's look at braking. BMW's brakes have always been pretty good, especially on their M cars, fitting massive rotors usually that are drilled and slotted to dissipate heat, and this has always worked pretty well for them. But I have to imagine that that braking force on the new M2 is pretty much the same as the previous, as they're running roughly the same size of wheel, and the caliper can't really get much bigger. And as a result, what happens is if we're working with roughly the same force, but an increased mass on the bottom half of that fraction, you get a lower acceleration, or in this case, deceleration. So I have to imagine that the braking force of the car is going to be significantly reduced as a result of the additional weight. Now, things get even worse when we look at centripetal acceleration, which is pretty much any time that you are going around a corner or any kind of turn. Now, the force that is going to be causing that turning, that centripetal acceleration, is actually going to be the friction of your tires, which is pretty much a constant among any car, as the coefficient of friction of your tires, assuming the same tires on both cars, is going to be roughly the same. Then what will happen is that the centripetal acceleration is actually equal to velocity squared divided by the radius of the turn. And we're able to carry less velocity as a result of the weight, because that extra weight causes extra inertia that has to be dragged inwards. So the cornering and handling of the car is going to be significantly decreased as a result of this additional weight, and that creates a problem, as the BMW M2 is destined to kind of be the more track-oriented, all-around, can be daily driven, but very light and agile car of the M line, and it's starting to break away from that with this additional weight. And that's actually going to segment me into our third problem, which is that the BMW M2 designers lost focus on what the car's purpose was to be. Now, something like the BMW M4 is designed to be a bit more straight line speed, fast street car oriented, whereas the M2 is designed to be a bit more maybe playful, track oriented, a bit more agile, a little bit lower powered. It could be pretty easy to daily drive, and as a result, it is a lower price because the engine technology and a lot of the factors that go into the car isn't as expensive to manufacture. Now, as we start to creep the weight up towards M4 ranges, it starts to beg the question, why not buy an M4, especially when a used one from the previous generation is about what the new M2 costs new? So now what you have is people who are looking to buy a BMW M car have this conflict. You can get a brand new M2, which is going to depreciate wildly. I mean, the old ones are already down into the mid to high $30,000 range. Or you can go and get a used M4, which has probably already fell a good bit through its depreciation curve, is going to have roughly the same, if not more, power, and weighs no more. The main benefit of buying an M2 would have been the fact that it's lighter, more agile, and maybe a little bit easier for track use or just daily driving in general, and was a bit of a cheaper option. However, with this new M2, we've kind of lost all of those things. The previous generation M4 weighs roughly the same, has the same, if not more, power, and if you go buy a used one, it'll cost you roughly the same of what the new one does new, and you're not going to get smacked with depreciation. And to top all of that off, the previous generation M4 is one of, if not the best BMW ever made in terms of looks. That's at least in my opinion, and the new M2 is really quite an eyesore. So now what you have is this dilemma created by people that are looking to buy a BMW, where you really don't know what decision to make, and I think it's going to be a hard decision to justify going and getting a new M2 over something like a used M4. And I think the fact that BMW kind of lost the idea of what the purpose of the M2 was with this new design is definitely going to come back to bite them in terms of sales figures. So I don't want this video to run too long, so I am going to be wrapping it up here, but those are three pretty simple reasons why I think the new BMW M2 is definitely in a little bit of trouble in terms of being able to actually sell the car. This is a car that has received a lot of hate online in pretty much just the past few weeks. This is a pretty recent topic that seems to be going around, that the new M2 is not only ugly, but is kind of a performance failure as well. And I pretty much just wanted to go a little bit deeper into some of the reasons as to why that seems to be the case, in case you haven't really seen much on why this car is getting so much hate. So, in summary, the brand new BMW M2 looks pretty terrible compared to the previous generation. It weighs significantly more, which drastically reduces performance in everything except for straight line acceleration, which they compensated for by making the engine more powerful. And lastly, the car seems to have lost a little bit of its purpose, as the extra weight makes it a bit more like a BMW M4, which begs the question, why not go buy a used one for the same amount of money? So that's all for today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave it a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this in the future, be sure to subscribe to the channel, as I would greatly appreciate it. But anyways, thanks for watching, and have a great day.